Have you ever wondered why your ride data doesn't line up with your buddies at the end of the day? Doesn't matter if you're using a dedicated GPS device or a handy dandy cell phone. Always seems to be discrepancies. I bet you've wondered why. Are you curious how that data gets from your legs up to the cloud? I know this one's likely to get some folks riled up a little bit. Feel free to leave your thoughts and disagreements in the comments below. But do me a favor, don't comment until you've watched and listened to everything. At the end of this video, you're going to be able to better understand why your data comes across the way it does. You're also going to be able to identify those pieces that are really most important to your own personal training. And better yet, at the end of this video, we'll show you how to fix any of those discrepancies that might be bothering you. Hi, I'm Kevin with Spinistry. We've been hosting ultra endurance mountain bike, gravel grinders, and bikepacking events since 2010. We've hosted over 300 events and over 25,000 participants over the years. And week in and week out, we come across people that are having issues with their Strava, Garmin's, Wahoo's, whatever else is out there. Lots of confusion about how the data works. We've seen it all, and we've got a few answers for you. Just a real quick aside, here's the short version of why we decided to put this video together. It happens very regularly at our events, particularly mountain bike events. Later in the video, we'll explain a little bit better why. But we typically advertise our route distances in mileage for the mountain bike events we do, since they are ultra endurance events. And invariably, what we say the distance of the race or the event might be is going to differ from the results people are seeing on their own GPS units, software, whatever else. And there's some very fundamental and basic reasons for that, but I can assure you that when we tell you we have a 50-mile race, it's pretty darn close to 50 miles. Now, that said, every device is different, every software platform is different, but there's a lot of technical generalities that kind of apply across the board. I recognize good and darn well that the settings on a Wahoo aren't going to work the same as the settings on a Garmin, or let alone a Garmin within another Garmin in the same family. So this isn't going to be a tutorial on how to fix your issues with your devices and your software platforms. It's just going to talk about the general ways to look at things and adjustments you might need to make within your software platform or on Strava, Ride with GPS. So as I mentioned in that previous story, incorrect mileage, particularly in mountain bike riding, is probably one of the biggest complaints about Strava data, GPS data in general. There's a bunch of different reasons for that, but here's the fundamental outline of how GPS works, and ultimately it's how that data is communicated to Strava. It doesn't matter if it's a dedicated GPS unit or a phone or whatever else. They all work kind of the same general principle. Basically, they take a sample of your GPS data about once a second. Once every second, it's going to plot where you are, relatively speaking. But there is an allowed margin of error of roughly 10 feet. And sometimes it's very precise. Sometimes it's on the outside envelope of those 10 feet. Better navigation devices, better GPS devices are going to have tighter tolerances on that. But there's always going to be variance. And that variance can go north, south, east, west, but even elevation-wise, up and down as well. So if you think about it, if every second your GPS device is plotting you, but it can be 10 feet off in multiple directions, that's not a very precise layout in and of itself. Quite frankly, mountain bike racing is not what they had in mind when they came up with the GPS system originally. And the smaller devices we use with a very small antenna, that's less than ideal for very precision GPS accuracy. So we're kind of working with a cobbled together system, so to speak. And all of the devices and the software platforms, basically they throw a lot of algorithms and software into the equation to kind of smooth out that data and fix things and connect the dots correctly, because that's basically all you're doing. Plot here 1 second, plot there 1 second, plot there the next second, and basically it just connects the dots in straight lines. Well, if you think about it, if you're riding a mountain bike at roughly 12 miles an hour and it's plotting every second, you can be on a curve that's going like this at 12 miles an hour, but if it plots you here and then it plots you here a second later, it's going to miss all of this curve. It's going to plot this line. So where that would have maybe been 17 feet or so of travel, it's going to calculate that at 11.5 feet, roughly. So that's the basic reason for mileage discrepancies, particularly on mountain bike trails that turn and twist a lot, have tree cover, things like that. There's going to be a lot of missed turns in the mix. Not as much of an issue when you're out on the road, basically making right angle turns. See, on mountain bike tracking, just using a portable GPS unit, whether it's a phone or a dedicated GPS device, realistically, you're going to have 10 to 25% of your mileage lost from tracking purposes. That's just the way the system works. How many twists and turns are in the trail will make that number higher. The faster you're going will make that number higher as well. So basically, if you're a very slow rider, going very slowly and pausing through every turn, it might actually track you fairly accurately. But if you're a Cat 1 racer blasting through switchbacks, it's not going to have accurate mileage. Now, before you go throwing your GPS unit away, there is a way that can be fixed. It's actually pretty simple, pretty straightforward. Stick around to the end. We'll show you exactly how that's done. The second biggest complaint we hear from people on a regular basis is climbing and elevation data is inaccurate. My ride says 1,800 feet. My friend's ride says 3,000 feet. Who's right? Realistically, both are probably wrong the way that it all works out. A little bit of the history of where we got to where we are now on how climbing and elevation is computed. Going back to the early days, basic GPS, like I said, it's that satellite triangulation. There's a network of satellites up in the sky. This one over here, this one over there, this one over here. They're all sending timing data to that GPS unit. So it recognizes the time each of those signals took to get to the GPS device, so that narrows down where it is by that triangulation. The more satellites that are hitting it with the timing data, the more accurate it is. And that, again, that applies forward, back, left, right, up, down. Technically, you can compute altitude with that, elevation change, but again, with that 10-foot variation, that can be a massive change, particularly on a flat surface, on a flat trail. If you're going straight up a mountain, a little bit more accurate, and the algorithms can naturally fill in the blanks. But if you're on just a flat mountain bike trail, it can easily say you're 10 feet higher than you are, or 10 feet lower than you are, and you covered a 10-foot difference in a fairly short period of time. It's really easy to miscalculate that elevation change just from raw GPS data. So it evolved to what they call barometric altimeters over time as well. And they started including barometric altimeters in the GPS devices, which is a little better, but there's still flaws in that data as well for various reasons. One, you can't fit the most sensitive and precise altimeter into a small GPS unit. I don't think phones have them at all. So if you're using a phone, you're not going to have a barometric altimeter. And secondly, particularly on longer rides, and we see this a lot with our ultra endurance rides and gravel grinders and things like that, again, it's a barometric altimeter. So if the barometer, the pressure reading changes, if weather changes during the course of the ride, then it's going to skew your benchmarks for elevation and altitude for the ride as well. And I think all of us have probably been on that ride where the weather has changed on us in the middle of the ride. So the basic way that's addressed at the software level, much of the time, probably most of the time, whichever software interface you're using, Strava most definitely does this. It matches your tracking data to a known topographical map, a contour map, with plotted elevation. And so it'll basically reverse engineer what your elevation is based on what the topographical map says. And again, for road and gravel on very well surveyed roads and for basically built roads that go at a roughly continuous slope, that works really well. That doesn't work really well on mountain bike trails because the reality is not every inch of land has been surveyed, and the contour data is usually about every 10 feet, and it's a very rough plot. So you can see how if you're on a flat mountain bike trail that might happen to be in between two contour lines on the map, let's say this is 520 feet and this is 530 feet, you can be rolling around on a mountain bike trail that says you're always under 530 and always above 520, so it's always going to say basically you're 525 and say you're flat. But realistically, the contours of the trail might have taken you 529 down to 521 100 times in that 10-foot range, and it's not going to reflect that elevation gain, that climbing that you did over time in that flat area. But in turn, the inverse is true as well. You may be on a trail that happens to hop up and down over that contour line, the data plot that the map is drawing from, and every 5 feet it says you're at 530. Well, now you're at 520, 530, 520. And it's giving you 10 feet of gain and 10 feet of loss multiple times over a quarter of a mile that didn't really happen. The reality is, from the elevation perspective, there's not a true fix for it. You kind of have to take it for what it is. The best way to work with elevation data is to just always use the same platforms for reference purposes. And by that, I mean, you can even compare different maps with the same routes on them from different providers. Ride with GPS versus Strava versus Garmin Connect versus Google Maps or Apple Maps or whatever else might be out there. You can plot the same route, let's say a 100-mile route that Ride with GPS says is 4,000 feet of climbing. Strava says it's 4,500. Google Maps says it's 3,500, whatever else. Which one's right? Nobody knows, quite frankly. There's no way to narrow down which one is right. The best you can do is just consistently reference the same one because it does its calculations the same way. So if you're looking at Ride with GPS, it says 4,000 for this ride and it says 3,000 for another ride. Well, you can guess that it's roughly 25% easier. Whether or not the actual elevation of 4,000 versus 4,500 or 3,500, if you rode what's labeled as 4,000 when you ride a 3,000, it's going to be 25% easier. Another big one that people really latch onto, and I personally believe in the wrong way, and I say this for good reason, calories burned calculations on all of these platforms. You can just basically throw those in the trash. Bunch of different reasons for it. The most precise way you can do it, basically everybody's bodies work differently. Everybody burns calories in a different way. Everybody has a different metabolism. Everybody has a different fitness level. There's no way to just throw math at it and say you went 25 miles an hour for 60 minutes, you burned X number of calories. It just doesn't work that way. You can try to refine it by writing in total weight of rider, bike, and everything else, but what if there was a headwind in there versus a tailwind? Things like that. Heart rate data gets thrown into the mix quite a bit, but again, everyone's metabolism is different, so you really can't do a basic formula that says, well, being this body weight with this bicycle weight and doing this heart rate for Y amount of time results in this number of calories burned. You can come up with an approximation, but realistically, any of these numbers there's a margin of error of 25 to 50%. It's that straightforward. And the way you also have to look at it, whoever delivers that information to you, and you'll see it on Zwift too with the pizza slices and whatever else, it behooves them to tell you you're burning more calories than you actually are. They're always going to be generous with the data they put out, because if you go, whew, I just burned 2,000 calories, that feels very rewarding, very satisfying, and is going to encourage you to come back again, is what it boils down to. So that's my only piece of advice. Any of these where they say you burned X number of calories, cut that in half. You can fine tune a lot of these pieces. What you have to utilize is a speed sensor, a wheel sensor that actually counts the revolutions of your wheel over the course of the ride. But here's the important part on top of that. It needs to be an accurately calibrated wheel sensor. That's where a lot of people miss the boat. A lot of people just hook it up to the hub, turn on the computer, hit auto calibrate, and run with it. Auto calibration just doesn't work. You have to do a real calibration, and here's how you do it. So you're going to mount the sensor on the hub. It can be front or rear hub. It really doesn't matter. Make sure your device is reading it. And with a newer phone, with Bluetooth, and even with just Strava, you can recognize speed sensors that way as well. You don't have to have a dedicated GPS device. Then what you want to do is lay out a tape measure, probably put out 12 or 15 feet, align the valve at the bottom of the wheel straight up and down, and put it at the 0 point on your tape measure. Then roll the bike forward until that valve goes all the way around and is bottom dead center again, and then notate total distance traveled in centimeters. Most of your calibration setups are going to want wheel size in millimeter. So you just take the number of centimeters and multiply by 10. A properly calibrated wheel sensor is going to definitely make things more accurate, but there's still a lot of variables that mean it's never going to be perfect. That measurement itself isn't precise, rolling it down the driveway or the sidewalk. So realistically, you probably want to do it multiple times and come up with an average. Varying tire pressures are going to mean a different circumference to the wheel. That's going to affect it. Ambient temperatures can raise or lower the tire pressure, which can affect the circumference of the wheel as well. I go through amount of effort over amount of time. That tells me all I need to know, but I do know mileage is important to a lot of folks. Hopefully this helped you out. Please like, comment, subscribe, leave the comments, and let us know how we can make this better. Keep them pedals turning.